Section 1. The house at the edge of the woods. If you had asked me when I was 13 what the scariest moment of my life would be, I probably would have laughed and said something about a horror movie or a haunted house attraction. I definitely wouldn't have told you it would start with a doorbell. Back then, my friends and I spent most weekends looking for trouble. Nothing serious, just the kind of dumb things bored middle school kids do when they think they're invincible. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every street looked almost identical. The lawns were neat, the sidewalks were clean, and most nights felt painfully predictable. 10 years ago, though, the area wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. Large patches of woods sat between neighborhoods. Empty lots stretched behind rows of houses. Once the sun went down, those wooded areas became dark islands of silence surrounded by streetlights and driveways. That Saturday night, I was hanging out with 3 friends I'll call Mark, James, and Matt. We had one goal: Ding Dong Ditch. It sounds harmless now, but at 13, it felt like the ultimate adrenaline rush. Mark and James were always the brave ones. They'd run up to the front door, ring the bell, and sprint away before anyone answered. Matt and I usually focused on finding hiding spots. We weren't as fast, but we were good at disappearing. For the first hour, everything went exactly as expected. We hit several houses throughout our neighborhood. Most people reacted the same way. A door would swing open. A confused homeowner would step outside, look around, maybe shout something into the darkness, and then head back inside. Every successful escape made us laugh harder. At one house, a man threatened to call the police after we rang his bell twice. That only encouraged us to move to the next block. The further we walked, the stranger the neighborhood seemed. The houses looked older. The lawns were less maintained. Streetlights were farther apart. And unlike our block, this one still had several wooded lots surrounding the homes. That's when we spotted a small house across from one of those wooded patches. The place looked neglected. Tall grass covered most of the yard. A weathered car sat in the driveway beneath a faded cover. Even from the street, something about the property felt isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. At the time, none of us thought much about it. We only saw one thing: a perfect hiding spot. Section 2. The Angry Man. The woods across from the house were exactly what we needed. Dense trees, thick shadows, plenty of places to hide. We slipped into the darkness while Mark volunteered to make the first run. From where we crouched among the trees, we watched him jog across the street toward the front porch. What happened next immediately felt different. Before Mark even reached the door, it swung open. A man stepped outside. He wasn't like any of the homeowners we bothered earlier that night. This guy was huge, at least 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, heavy build. Even from a distance, he looked intimidating. And unlike everyone else, he wasn't confused. He was furious. The second he stepped outside, he began scanning the yard. "Come out," he shouted. His voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood. He marched through the grass, checking bushes, looking around corners, and yelling threats into the darkness. Meanwhile, the 4 of us hid in the woods trying not to laugh. At 13 years old, we thought it was hilarious. Looking back, we were incredibly stupid. Eventually, after several minutes of searching, the man returned inside. The porch light remained on, the front door closed, and silence settled over the street again. Most kids would have taken that as a sign to leave. Mark wasn't most kids. After waiting a few minutes, he peeked toward the windows. Everything looked clear. Then he grinned and started moving back toward the house. Even from our hiding spot, I remember thinking it was a terrible idea. The man already seemed unstable. Ringing his bell again felt like pushing our luck far too far. But Mark didn't care. He reached the porch, hit the doorbell, and immediately sprinted away toward the side of the house. This time, the reaction was instant. The door flew open, and every bit of laughter disappeared from our group. The man stepped outside holding a rifle. Nobody said a word. We just stared. The night suddenly felt much colder. The game wasn't funny anymore. The man moved across the yard with purpose, checking every location he had searched before. Behind bushes, around trees, near the covered car. Then he stopped, right in the center of the lawn. He stood perfectly still. For several long seconds, he simply looked around. Then his head slowly turned, toward the woods, toward us. My stomach tightened. Matt and James noticed it too. Without speaking, we all crouched lower behind the brush. The man continued staring in our direction. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Section 3. The Window Watcher. Those few seconds felt endless. When you're 13, fear works differently. Part of your brain still believes adults can't actually hurt you, that whatever danger exists in movies doesn't happen in real life. But as that man stared into the woods, rifle hanging at his side, I started realizing how wrong that belief was. Eventually, he turned away. Without saying a word, he walked back inside the house. The front door shut. For a moment, relief washed over us. Maybe he hadn't seen us after all. Maybe we'd gotten lucky. Then we noticed movement inside the house. The man appeared at the front window. He stood completely still. The glow from inside illuminated part of his face, while the rest remained hidden in shadow. He looked like a statue. And once again, he was staring directly toward the woods. Toward us. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sounds were distant insects and our own breathing. I remember hearing my heartbeat pounding inside my ears. Then something made the situation even worse. Mark. He was still out there. We spotted him slowly creeping back toward the front porch. Apparently, he hadn't seen the man standing in the window. I wanted to yell. I wanted to wave my arms. Anything. But fear kept me frozen. The man remained motionless behind the glass. Mark reached the porch, pressed the doorbell, and sprinted away. Still, the man didn't react. At least not immediately. Nearly a full minute passed. Then he suddenly turned and disappeared from the window. The house became dark and still. We waited. Nothing happened. No front door opening. No shouting. No movement. The silence became almost worse than the yelling had been. Minutes seemed to crawl by. We couldn't find Mark anywhere. Maybe he had hidden behind the house. Maybe he was already running home. We had no idea. Then, from somewhere across the street, a voice exploded through the darkness. "Run!" It was Mark. The urgency in his voice sent a shock through my entire body. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't excitement. It was panic. Pure panic. For a split second, none of us understood why. Then we heard something else. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Coming from behind us inside the woods. The sound was getting closer. Branches snapped. Leaves crunched. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. Instinctively, we turned around. And what we saw made every ounce of blood drain from my face. The man had entered the woods. Section 4. Hunted. The rifle was raised. Not pointed at the ground. Not hanging casually at his side. Raised. And aimed in our direction. For one horrifying second, everything seemed to stop. I can still picture it clearly. The darkness between the trees. The man's massive frame. The weapon in his hands. And the realization that he had somehow crossed the street and entered the woods without us noticing. The moment shattered any illusion that this was still some harmless prank. This man wasn't chasing kids off his lawn. He was hunting for whoever had been bothering him. And he had found us. "Go!" James screamed. That was all it took. The four of us exploded out of our hiding spot. Branches whipped against our faces. Twigs snapped beneath our shoes. The woods that had seemed like the perfect hiding place minutes earlier suddenly felt like a trap. I could hear someone crashing through the brush behind us. Whether it was the man or just one of my friends, I didn't know. I wasn't about to look back long enough to find out. The only thing that mattered was running. Every breath burned. My lungs felt ready to burst. The moment we reached the edge of the woods, we sprinted across the street. Mark was waiting there. His face looked pale even in the darkness. "Keep going," he yelled. None of us argued. We ran. Past houses. Past driveways. Past intersections. The neighborhood became a blur of streetlights and shadows. Every few seconds I expected to hear footsteps behind us. Or worse, a gunshot. But all I heard was my own breathing and the pounding of shoes against pavement. Finally, after several blocks, we slowed down. Then stopped, bent over and gasping for air. The street around us was empty. No sign of the man. No sign of the rifle. No sign of anyone following us. For several moments, nobody spoke. We were too exhausted. Too shocked. Too confused. Eventually, Mark explained what had happened. After ringing the bell for the final time, he had hidden near the house. From there, he saw something we hadn't. The man had quietly slipped out of his house. Instead of coming through the front yard, he crossed the street and entered the woods from another angle. He had been moving toward us the entire time. Carefully, silently, using the darkness for cover. The moment Mark realized where he was headed, he ran to warn us. And if he hadn't. Section 5. The house we never returned to. The walk home that night felt completely different from the rest of the evening. The excitement was gone. The laughter was gone. Even Mark, who normally turned everything into a joke, was unusually quiet. We kept replaying the events in our heads. The angry homeowner, the rifle, the staring from the window, the silent approach through the woods. None of it made sense. At least not to a group of 13-year-old kids. At that age, we understood that people got angry. We understood being yelled at. We even understood the possibility of someone calling the police. But this felt different. The image that stayed with me wasn't the rifle itself. It was how patient the man had been. He hadn't rushed outside screaming. He hadn't chased us down the street. Instead, he watched, waited, studied the woods, then quietly moved into them. That detail bothered me more than anything else. When we finally made it back toward our neighborhood, nobody suggested continuing our prank spree. The night was over. We all went home. The next few days, we told the story to a handful of friends. Most reacted exactly how you'd expect. Some laughed. Others thought we were exaggerating. A few looked genuinely disturbed. But none of them had been there. None of them had felt that moment when a voice shouted, "Run!" from the darkness. And none of them had turned around to find a grown man carrying a rifle through the woods behind them. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't appreciate then. We were lucky, very lucky. Teenagers often convince themselves they're untouchable, that consequences only happen to other people. That night shattered that illusion. What started as a childish game became the closest encounter with real danger I've ever experienced. We never reported the man. Honestly, we never even considered it. We were kids who had been trespassing around people's property and ringing doorbells for fun. We just wanted the whole thing behind us. Fortunately, the house wasn't anywhere near our homes. It sat several blocks away in a part of the neighborhood we rarely visited. That made avoiding it easy, and that's exactly what we did. To this day, I couldn't tell you who lived there or what became of that property. Maybe the man moved away. Maybe the house was eventually torn down. Maybe it's still standing exactly where it was that night. All I know is this. Out of every reckless thing my friends and I did growing up, that was the one experience we never repeated. Because sometimes it only takes one glimpse of real danger to realize how close you've come to becoming part of a much darker story.